The fog clung to the marina like a shroud muffling the world until it felt like Eric was the only soul left. His boots sank into the muddy shore, each step a reluctant pull toward the houseboat his uncle had left him, a rotting relic he'd never wanted. The air smelled of salt and decay, sharp enough to sting his lungs. In the distance, the boat's silhouette loomed, its hull a sagging shadow against the gray. Then a low growl sliced through the mist, raw and deliberate, stopping Eric cold. On the deck, a German shepherd stood, ears-pinned eyes like twin lanterns burning through the haze. Sentinel, the lawyer, had called him. The dog's gaze held no welcome, only a warning, as if the boat itself had grown teeth. Eric's chest tightened, his own isolation staring back unyielding. The houseboat creaked under Eric's weight, its boards groaning like old bones. Peeling paint flaked onto his hands, and the air inside was heavy with mildew, a sour tang that clung to his throat. Rusted railings leaned toward the water as if the boat longed to sink and be done with it. Sentinel paced the deck, his limp barely noticeable, but his scars stark, a jagged line across his muzzle glinting in the dim light. Claw marks scored the hatch at the boat's center, locked tight with a padlock that didn't match the rest of the decay. The fog pressed closer, swallowing the marina's distant lights, save for one maze office glowing faintly across the docks. Sentinel's growl softened, but his eyes never left Eric, guarding something neither could name. Eric's hand hovered over the rusted railing, fingers curling back as if the metal might burn him with memories he'd spent years burying. Inside his mind, the voices clawed, his father's laughter from boyhood fishing trips, twisted now into the courtroom echoes of guilty, the word that had scattered their family like debris in a storm. He wasn't here by choice. The inheritance was a chain dragging him back to the shame he'd fled through endless highways and empty bottles. Sentinel's stare bored into him, those amber eyes unblinking, as if the dog could see the hollow core where Eric's resolve had withered. He turned away, shoulders slumping under the fog's weight, his breath shallow, trapped in the numbness that had become his armor. Why this boat? Why now? The questions looped unanswered, stirring a quiet ache that threatened to crack the facade. Sentinel shifted, a soft whine escaping, mirroring the regret Eric couldn't voice. The marina's silence pressed in, amplifying the pulse in his ears, a rhythm of isolation he knew too well. He leaned against the cabin wall, the wood damp and unforgiving, wondering if the dog guarded secrets or just shared the same invisible wounds. As Eric straightened, Sentinel's growl faded into a hesitant whine, the dog's head tilting slightly, ears twitching toward the sound of distant footsteps on the dock. Their eyes locked, a fleeting bridge across the deck. Sentinel's gaze softening just enough to hint at something beyond suspicion, a shared recognition in the mist. Eric froze, his hand inching toward the hatch, but he pulled back the moment, heavy with unspoken promise. Across the marina, May's office light flickered like a beacon, her shadow passing the window, watching, waiting. Change hung in the air, thick as the fog, whispering that this boat, this dog, might unravel the threads of his past. The memories washed over Eric like the tide pulling at the houseboat's moorings, relentless and cold. He saw his father as he once was, a broad-shouldered man with a laugh that boomed across the docks, teaching him to tie knots on sunlit afternoons, the sea spray glinting like promises. "This water's in our blood, son." He'd say, his eyes alive with the thrill of hidden coves and midnight runs. But that light had dimmed in the courtroom, where whispers of smuggling turned to shouts of betrayal, the evidence stacking like storm clouds until the gavel fell. Guilty. Eric, barely 18, had watched his father led away in chains, the family name tainted, their home sold to pay debts that weren't just financial. He'd fled then, hitchhiking out of town with a backpack and a heart armored in resentment, odd jobs in dusty ports sustaining him, but never filling the void. Eric's days blurred into a routine as predictable as the tide, each one a careful avoidance of anything that might anchor him. He unpacked his duffel in the cramped cabin, the zipper's rasp, the only sound breaking the marina's hush-folding worn shirts with mechanical precision to ward off the emptiness gnawing inside. Mornings meant black coffee from a dented thermos sipped on the deck while staring at the fog-veiled water, his thoughts a loop of dead-end jobs, bartending in nameless towns, hauling crates on forgotten piers, each gig shorter than the last, his defenses hardening like barnacles on the hull. Sentinel watched from his corner eyes, tracking every move, but never approaching his silence a mirror to Eric's own. When May sauntered over, her smile too bright against the gray, offering a plate of cookies with a welcome to the family that rang hollow, Eric muttered thanks and retreated, the boat's stale air wrapping around him like a cocoon. He avoided the hatchet's lock, a reminder of secrets he didn't want, just as he sidestepped calls from old acquaintances, his phone vibrating unanswered in his pocket. The numbness was his shield, a frozen sea where emotions couldn't surface. But in the quiet hours, as the boat rocked gently, cracks appeared, a fleeting wish for something more buried deep, like the compartment below. Sentinel's frame, once a testament to bred strength, now carried the map of survival etched in scars that spoke louder than any bark. His muzzle bore a jagged line, pink and raw, where fur refused to regrow, a souvenir from a chain-link fence, or a boot, Eric couldn't tell. But the way the dog flinched at sudden shadows suggested the latter. The limp in his hind leg was subtle, a hitch in his gait, like a whispered regret, born perhaps from a fall off a dock or a deliberate strike to keep him down. He never strayed far from the hatch, his body coiled like a spring rusted by time, growling low when the wind rattled the lock, as if the boat's underbelly held the last fragment of his shattered world. In the quiet hours, Eric pieced together fragments from the uncle's scattered notes. Sentinel had been found wandering the marina years ago, half-starved, his collar embedded in swollen skin tags, scraped blank. But the dog's eyes told more, amber pools that darted with the ghosts of betrayal, trained perhaps by Eric's father, or the shadowy figures in the smuggling ring conditioned to guard crates that smelled of salt and sin. Flashbacks haunted Sentinel's sleep twitches and whimpers under the deck light, reliving nights of thunderous waves and harsh commands, his loyalty twisted into a weapon. He'd bitten once, the reports would later reveal, defending a handler who'd abandoned him, the mark of his teeth, a brand of desperate allegiance. Now that loyalty fixed on the compartment, a hidden vault below deck where the air grew thicker, mustier, as if secrets fermented in the dark. In the dim cabin light, Eric and Sentinel existed as echoes of each other. Two silhouettes carved from the same vein of isolation, their presences orbiting without collision. Eric moved like a ghost through the boat's narrow spaces, his hands avoiding contact, his eyes skimming the horizon where fog met water. A vast emptiness that mirrored the void he'd cultivated inside connections severed like frayed ropes left behind in every town he'd fled. Sentinel mirrored this detachment, curling into the deck's corner, his body a fortress of fur and sinew, shunning the warmth of the cabin as if touch were a trap. Their shared mistrust hung in the air, thick as the mildew scent clinging to the walls, each glance a tentative probe into the other's defenses. Eric began with small offerings, a bowl of kibble pushed toward the hatch with the toe of his boot, not daring to hand it over, fearing the snap of rejection. Sentinel eyed it warily, nostrils flaring, but hunger won in increments. He'd drag it closer with a paw, eating in hurried bites while watching Eric's back, their routines sinking in silent rhythm. The sky cracked open without warning, thunder rolling in like a predator's roar, and the marina transformed into a churning beast. Rain lashed the houseboat's deck sheets of water, slamming against the hull, turning the fog into a blinding veil. Eric stumbled from the cabin, his shirt clinging cold to his skin, the metallic tang of ozone sharp in his throat. Sentinel's barking pierced the chaos, frantic, urgent, not the guarded growls of before, but a desperate plea echoing off the waves. The dog paced wildly near the hatch, fur-matted and slick paws slipping on the slick boards, his eyes wide with terror as lightning forked overhead, illuminating the scarred muzzle twisted in panic. The boat pitched violently, ropes straining against the dock, and Eric's heart hammered as he spotted the hatch, rattling water pooling around its edges, threatening to flood whatever lay below. Across the marina, May's office light swayed like a lantern in the gale, her silhouette frozen in the window, watching the turmoil unfold. Sentinel's barks grew hoarse, his body trembling not just from the cold, but from some deeper instinct, as if the storm unearthed ghosts from the compartment's depths. Eric froze, the urgency coiling in his gut. the dog's vulnerability a mirror to his own buried fears. Eric's mind waged war in the downpour, logic screaming to bolt the cabin door and let the storm rage on to flee this cursed inheritance like he'd fled everything else tied to his father's shadow. Why risk it? The dog was just a stray guardian, fierce and unyielding, not his burden. Opening that hatch meant dredging up secrets that could sink him deeper into the family mire of lies and arrests. But Sentinel's whine cut through the thunder, a raw sound that echoed Eric's own suppressed cries from nights alone on endless roads, torn between the pull of compassion and the safety of numbness. His hands trembled on the hatch's lock, rain blurring his vision as images flashed his father's handcuffed wrists, the courtroom's cold judgment warning him that caring led to chains. Yet the dog's eyes locked on his pleading. Without words, a subtle shift that cracked Eric's resolve empathy, overriding the fear that had kept him adrift. This wasn't just a storm. It was a reckoning, and turning away now felt like abandoning himself. Eric's resolve hardened against the storm's fury, his fingers fumbling with the hatch's rusted lock, the key from his uncle's envelope slick in his grip. Rain pounded his back like accusations, but he twisted it open with a grating snap, the lid lifting to reveal a dark maw exhaling musty secrets. Sentinel darted forward, then hesitated his paws, skidding on the wet deck, a whine escaping as lightning etched his silhouette in stark relief. Eric descended first, the ladder creaking under his weight, the compartment below a chaos of scattered papers and crates, water seeping through cracks like invading fingers. The dog followed messily, slipping on the rungs, landing with a thud that echoed his vulnerability, imperfect, raw, but committed. Eric's flashlight beam danced over faded documents, glimpses of names and dates blurring in the damp, his heart racing not just from the gale, but from the irreversible plunge into his father's shadowed world. Sentinel pressed close, his fur brushing Eric's leg for the first time, a tentative alliance forged in the storm's imperfect embrace. In the storm's waning howl, Eric hauled Sentinel into the cabin, the dog's soaked body heavy and unresisting, his claws scraping the wooden floor like reluctant signatures on an unspoken agreement. The compartment sealed behind them, its secrets a weight pressing on Eric's chest. But for now, he focused on the immediate towels from a musty drawer rubbed gently over Sentinel's trembling frame, the dog's eyes tracking every motion with wary acceptance. Eric murmured nonsense words. "Easy now, boy," his voice a threadbare comfort in the dim light, while Sentinel shook off water in a spray that misted the air, his breath steadying into something like relief. The act felt impulsive, a leap into the unknown, but as Sentinel curled near the stove's faint warmth, not touching but close enough to feel the heat shared, a silent vow took shape, protection for the guardian space, for the drifter. Outside, May's light still burned across the marina, her voice lost in the wind. But inside, the pact solidified, fragile as wet paper, yet binding them against the resurfacing past. Eric sat against the wall, hand outstretched but not insisting, and Sentinel's gaze softened the first crack in his armored suspicion, promising a healing woven from mutual need. The days blurred into a tentative truce on the houseboat, where silence reigned like an uneasy fog over the marina. Sentinel stationed himself at the far end of the deck, his body a coiled shadow against the peeling rail eyes, like polished obsidian, tracking Eric's every motion. Pouring coffee, flipping through yellowed logbooks, pacing the narrow confines, as if measuring the cage of his inheritance. The dog's growls rumbled low, not threats, but barriers, a guttural reminder of boundaries drawn in invisible ink, his scarred muzzle twitching at the scent of Eric's approach. Eric respected the divide, his own movements deliberate and slow, like navigating a minefield of unspoken histories. He avoided direct stares, turning instead to the water's glassy surface, where ripples distorted his reflection into something fragmented, much like the man he felt inside. Adrift, unmoored, the weight of his father's ghosts pressing heavier in the quiet. Internal whispers plagued him. Why stay? The boat was a relic. Sentinel, a complication, yet leaving felt like another abandonment, echoing the night he'd walked away from his family's crumbling porch. The air hung thick with salt and unspoken tension, the creak of the hull a metronome to their standoff. Sentinel's ears perked at distant boat engines, his body tensing, but he never initiated content in his isolation fur, bristling like thorns on a forgotten vine. Eric left food bowls untouched at first, pushing them halfway across the deck with a broom handle, not daring to bridge the gap. His heart, a drumbeat of reluctance, masked his patience. Nights amplified the distance. Eric lay in the cabin staring at the ceiling's water stains, blooming like bruises, while Sentinel's silhouette loomed outside the porthole, a guardian statue under the moon's pale gaze. In the hush of a fog-draped afternoon, Eric knelt by the deck's edge, his fingers tracing a fresh cut from a jagged nail on the hull, blood welling like unspoken regrets. The sting pulled him inward, memories of road-scraped knuckles from fights he couldn't recall the reasons for his life, a series of wounds self-inflicted in the name of escape. Sentinel observed from his corner body, still as a statue carved from shadow, but his eyes, those deep amber pools, held a flicker of something akin to recognition, as if the scent of blood stirred echoes of his own scarred past. Eric wrapped the cut with a rag, movements slow and deliberate, the fabric's rough weave a metaphor for the patchwork armor he wore around his heart. Without thinking, he tore a strip and left it near the food bowl, an offering not just of sustenance, but of shared frailty. Sentinel approached warily after Eric retreated, nostrils flaring at the mingled smells of kibble and coppery blood, his limp more pronounced in the damp air, each step a testament to pains mirrored but unshared. He nosed the food, eating in measured bites, but paused at the rag, his tongue flicking out tentatively, a silent acknowledgement of the gesture. The splintered oar lay forgotten in the boat's storage nook, its wood cracked like veins in marble, and when Eric's hand brushed it during a routine sweep of the deck, the touch ignited a cascade of memories sharp as salt in a wound. He saw his father wielding a similar oar on calmer waters, rowing them through sun-dappled bays, laughter mingling with the lap of waves before the arrests, before the whispers of smuggling turned their world to ash. Eric's grip tightened knuckles, whitening the internal storm raging. Why cling to this relic, this life I never chose? The oar slipped clattering to the floor with a hollow thud that echoed through the hull. Sentinel flinched at the noise, his body tensing like a bowstring, ears flattening as if the sound summoned ghosts of his own harsh commands from shadowed figures. Crates thudding on docks under cover of night, a boot connecting with his side in punishment for some perceived failure. But instead of retreating, the dog paused, head cocking his amber eyes, meeting Eric's in a moment of shared vulnerability. No recoil, but a hesitant stillness that spoke volumes. Eric knelt slowly, extending a hand not to touch, but to offer the broken piece, a gesture laden with symbolism, the fractured past they both carried. Sentinel approached inch by inch, nostrils flaring at the wood's scent, his limp more a deliberate step now, and for the first time he didn't growl, accepting the proximity as a tie binding their fragmented histories. The marina's fog muffled the world outside, turning the boat into a confessional, where small acts bridged chasms, their emotional threads weaving tighter without a word uttered. Sunlight pierced the perpetual fog one rare morning, casting golden shards across the deck like scattered coins from a forgotten treasure, and Eric felt a tentative warmth seep into his bones, thawing the frost of his isolation. He rummaged in the cabin for an old rope, frayed but sturdy, tying a knot at one end to fashion a makeshift toy, his movements born from impulse rather than plan, a spark of playfulness buried under layers of driftwood existence. Tossing it lightly toward Sentinel, who lounged in his usual spot, Eric half expected rejection, but the dog's ears, perked eyes igniting with a curiosity that mirrored Eric's own suppressed joy. Sentinel pounced hesitantly at first pause, batting the rope with cautious swipes, his tail giving a single experimental wag that sliced through the air like a flag of truce. Laughter bubbled up in Eric unexpectedly, a rusty sound echoing off the hull as the dog tugged back, strength tempered by gentleness, their game unfolding in slow motion under the warming sky. The boat seemed less a prison now, its creaks harmonizing with their breaths, the space expanding with each shared glance. Sentinel's growls replaced by playful huffs, Eric's guarded posture softening into ease. As the sun climbed, they rested side by side, not touching but closed the rope discarded between them like a bridge crossed. The night settled over the marina like a velvet curtain, the air thick with the scent of salt and damp wood, the only sound the gentle slap of waves against the houseboat's hull. Eric sat on the deck, his back against the cabin wall, a half-empty bottle of whiskey resting beside him, its burn a faint echo of the fires he'd doused in his wandering years. Sentinel lay a few feet away, his silhouette a dark sentinel under the moon's pale glow. But tonight, something shifted, an unspoken tide turning in the dog's amber eyes. Slowly, deliberately, Sentinel rose, his limp softened by purpose, and crossed the deck, each step a quiet rebellion against his guarded past. He paused, nostrils flaring, then lowered himself beside Eric close enough that the warmth of his fur brushed Eric's knee, a tentative offering of trust that felt like a seismic crack in the world's foundation. The dog's head rested near, not on Eric's leg, his breath steady but weighted as if exhaling years of betrayal into the night air. The marina's calm shattered in the dead of night, a restless undercurrent stirring the fog like a predator circling its prey. Sentinel's sudden barking ripped through the silence, a jagged edge of alarm that yanked Eric from a fitful sleep, his heart pounding as he stumbled to the deck. The dog stood rigid, hackles raised like a ridge of thorns, his growl low and primal, aimed at the dark expanse of the dock where footsteps, deliberate, uneven, crunched on gravel. The air felt charged, heavy with the scent of diesel and menace, as if the past had clawed its way back to the surface. Sentinel's ears twitched, pinpointing a shadow moving beyond the marina's weak lights, and Eric's gut twisted the memory of his father's whispered warnings. They'll come for what's hidden, resurfacing like a sunken wreck. Across the water, May's office light flickered erratically, not the steady beacon of before, but a signal of unrest pulsing like a warning flare. Sentinel's body tensed further, his limp forgotten in the surge of instinct, his eyes darting to the hatch as if the secrets below were calling the threat closer. Eric's hand found the railing, its cold bite grounding him, but his mind raced. What does he sense that I can't? The fog seemed to thicken, muffling the footsteps, but amplifying the dog's low snarl, a primal alert that danger wasn't just near, it was familiar. The marina, once a refuge, now felt like a trap, its quiet broken by the echo of a past neither Eric nor Sentinel could outrun. The fog parted just enough for May's figure to emerge on the dock, her usual warmth replaced by a sharp edge, her voice slicing through the night with a command that made Sentinel's snarl explode into a feral bark. Eric's pulse raced as the dog lunged toward the railing. Teeth bared his scarred muzzle, gleaming under the marina's flickering lamp like a blade drawn from memory. May's words, "You need to open that hatch, Eric, tonight," carried a weight that wasn't just curiosity, and her eyes glinted with something predatory, a betrayal unmasked. Eric's mind reeled, fragments of his father's trial flashing like lightning, whispered names, a marina mentioned in hushed tones, and May's signature on a faded logbook he'd found among the boat's papers, linking her to the smuggling ring that had ruined his family. Sentinel's aggression surged his body, a taut spring, as if he recognized her scent from a past laced with cruelty, handlers who'd chained him, voices that had turned from coaxing to commanding. Eric stepped between them, his own anger flaring a mirror to the dog's. "What do you know about this boat, May?" Her smile faltered a crack in her facade, and the air thickened with the weight of recognition, Sentinel's barks echoing Eric's internal scream of betrayal. Flashbacks flooded him, his father's desperate pleas of innocence, the marina's shadow looming in every testimony, and now May standing too close, her presence a violation of the fragile sanctuary he'd built with Sentinel. The dog's eyes locked on hers, his growl a low tremor of rage and fear, revealing a shared wound. Both had been pawns in a game of greed, their trust shattered by the same hands. Eric's fists clenched, his voice low but steady. "Back off, or I let him decide what happens next." The standoff hung like a storm cloud. May's retreat a temporary surrender, but the ghosts of their pasts loomed larger, clawing at the edges of their fragile bond. May returned at dawn, her shadow lengthening across the dock with a stranger at her side, a wiry man with a scar above his eye, his presence pulling the air taut like a wire about to snap. Sentinel's growl became a roar, his body low and primed, the limp forgotten, as he positioned himself between Eric and the intruders, his teeth flashing like a warning flare. Eric's heart pounded as he clutched a crumpled police report he'd found in the compartment the night before, its faded ink detailing a smuggling bust and a dog bite that matched Sentinel's scarred muzzle, a mark from a night when loyalty had turned to violence. May's voice was cold now. No pretense. The evidence in that hatch belongs to us, Eric. Hand it over, or she nodded to the thug takes it. The man's hand rested on a knife at his belt, and Sentinel's hackles rose, his snarl a primal echo of recognition, as if this stranger was the handler who'd once chained him to a crate-filled dock. Eric's mind raced through fragments his father's letters claiming a set-up names scrawled in the margins, and now this confrontation, the past crashing into the present like waves against the hull. You framed him. Eric spat, stepping forward, the report in his fist. Sentinel's warmth at his side, a steadying force. The thug lunged, knife glinting, but Sentinel moved faster, teeth snapping inches from flesh, forcing the man back. Eric's voice shook but held. You don't get to touch this boat or him. May's eyes narrowed, calculating, but the thug's retreat gave Eric a moment to breathe, the standoff electric with unspoken threats. The compartment's contents, a ledger, photos, a letter proving his father's innocence, burned in his mind, a truth worth fighting for. Sentinel's stance never wavered, his loyalty a shield, and Eric felt the weight of their bond solidify, a mutual defiance against the ghosts now standing before them. The thug's footsteps faded into the fog, May's silhouette dissolving like smoke, leaving the marina's air thick with the residue of confrontation, a metallic tang of fear mingling with the salt. Eric slumped against the railing, his breath ragged, the police report crumpling in his fist as adrenaline ebbed, revealing the tremor in his hands. Sentinel pressed close, his flank warm against Eric's leg, a solid anchor in the swirling mist, his panting slowing to match Eric's rhythm, as if the dog absorbed the chaos and exhaled calm. The compartment's hatch loomed open now, its secrets spilling like confessions, and Eric descended once more, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom to illuminate a yellowed letter tucked in a crate's corner. His father's handwriting, words of desperation, I was the fall guy, May knows. The revelation hit like a wave, crashing inward, washing away layers of resentment, leaving raw hope in its wake. The marina stirred under a deceptive calm, the fog thinning just enough to reveal silhouettes of unfamiliar boats idling at the inlet's mouth, their engines a low thrum like a predator's breath held in wait. Sentinel's hackles rose first, a ridge of fur sharpening along his spine, his body freezing mid-step on the deck, ears swiveling toward the water's edge where shadows danced unnaturally. Eric felt it too, a prickling at the nape of his neck, the air growing heavier, charged with the scent of exhaust and intent, as if the past had dispatched hunters to reclaim its due. He knelt by the hatch, delving deeper into the compartment's bowels, fingers, sifting through dust-caked files until they closed on a stack of documents, ledgers scrawled with transactions, his father's name crossed out and replaced with May's annotations, branding him the scapegoat in a web of deceit that spanned decades. The pages trembled in his grip, each line a revelation, setups, payoffs, the marina as a hub for shadows. Sentinel growled softly, his gaze fixed on the horizon, body taut as a bowstring, instincts screaming what Eric's mind pieced together. May's absence from her office, the lights dimmed like a feigned retreat, heightening the sense of eyes upon them, unseen but unyielding. Eric's internal storm raged, she circling back with reinforcements. The marina's deceptive calm shattered as one of the stranger boats glided closer, its hull slicing through the water like a shark closing in on blood. May stepped onto the dock, her face stripped of its usual charm, now carved with cold purpose, flanked by the scarred thug from before, his knife now openly brandished, glinting like a promise of violence under the marina's flickering lamps. Sentinel's growl erupted into a snarl that vibrated through the deck, his body a taut barrier between Eric and the intruders, teeth bared as if the past itself had materialized to reclaim them. You've got what's mine, May said, her voice a blade wrapped in silk, pointing to the hatch, the ledger, the photos, all of it. Eric clutched the documents tighter, their edges biting into his palm, the truth about his father's innocence, a fragile shield against the threat now cornering them. Eric's voice broke through the chaos, raw but steady, as he stepped forward, the ledger raised like a flag of defiance. You want the truth. It's here. May you set him up. The words landed like a thunderclap, freezing May's advance. her face twisting with a flicker of fear as the thug hesitated, his knife hovering. Sentinel stood firm, his snarl a low rumble, body shielding Eric, his scarred muzzle a testament to battles fought for others who'd left him behind. Eric's mind raced, piecing together the ledger's entries, dates, payments. May's initials beside his father's crossed-out name, a betrayal that had stolen years from them both. The thug lunged again, but Sentinel was faster, teeth clamping onto the man's wrist, a howl of pain splitting the air as the knife clattered to the deck. Eric seized the moment, shoving the documents into his jacket and grabbing the rope toy, tossing it toward May as a distraction, her flinch buying precious seconds. "You framed my father, and this dog knows it," Eric shouted, his voice a mix of fury and conviction fueled by Sentinel's unwavering loyalty. The marina exhaled a hushed breath as the fog lifted slightly, revealing the houseboat's deck strewn with the remnants of the night's fury, a scattered knife-torn fabric, droplets of blood mingling with dew like forgotten tears. Eric moved with deliberate slowness, his hands steady but aching as he bandaged Sentinel's shallow cut from the thug's blade, the dog's flank rising and falling in soft rhythms, his amber eyes half closed in weary trust. The air hung heavy, scented with salt, and spent adrenaline, the waves lapping gently against the hull like a whispered reassurance. Eric sat back against the railing, his own bruises throbbing faintly, a physical echo of the emotional void that threatened to swallow him whole, the rush of confrontation giving way to an emptiness where doubt crept in. What now? The documents lay secured in the cabin, his father's innocence, a fragile light in the gloom, but the silence amplified the solitude, May's threats lingering like shadows at the dock's edge. Sentinel shifted closer, his head resting on Eric's thigh, a quiet weight that grounded him, their breaths sinking in long-drawn pauses. The marina stirred faintly, gulls wheeling overhead, a distant buoy clanging. But here on the boat, time stretched minimal movements, marking survival, a hand stroking fur, a sigh escaping lips. Eric's gaze drifted to the horizon, the fog's retreat unveiling a pale sun, its rays tentative, like hope testing the waters. The void wasn't defeat. It was space for healing, a quiet aftermath, where bonds reformed in the stillness. Days blurred into a rhythm of quiet restoration on the houseboat, the marina's fog a soft veil that muffled the world's intrusions, allowing Eric and Sentinel to weave their healing through small, repeated acts. Eric rose at dawn, his steps measured across the deck, pouring kibble into the bowl with a clink that drew Sentinel from his corner, the dog's approach no longer wary, but expectant tail giving a subtle wag as he ate from Eric's outstretched hand, the warmth of his muzzle brushing skin like a seal of trust. The air carried the tang of sea and fresh coffee, Eric sipping slowly, while Sentinel lay nearby, their presences intertwining, Eric flipping through the ledger's pages, his brow furrowing in concentration, Sentinel's ears perking at every turn as if guarding the revelations. Afternoons brought walks along the dock, Sentinel healing without a leash, his limp easing with each stride, mirroring Eric's own loosening tension, the crunch of gravel under boots and paws, a steady tempo syncing their recoveries. Eric submitted the evidence anonymously to authorities, a letter sealed with trembling fingers. And as he returned to the boat, Sentinel greeted him with a nudge, head butting gently against his leg, eyes meeting in a gaze that spoke of mutual mending. Evenings unfolded in shared silence, Eric repairing the hull's splintered wood hammer taps echoing softly, while Sentinel watched, occasionally licking a paw or shifting closer, his fur's warmth a sensory anchor against the cooling night. The bond deepened through these interwoven moments, Eric's smiles growing freer, Sentinel's growls replaced by contented sighs, their emotions rising in tandem, a quiet symphony of resilience. The compartment, once a vault of secrets, now stood open, its emptiness a symbol of burdens lifted, and as stars pierced the fog, Eric's hand rested on Sentinel's back, the steady rise and fall, a heartbeat of renewal. Their healing, a mirror reflecting strength born from shared scars. Eric untied the moorings with hands that no longer trembled, the ropes slipping free like shed burdens as the houseboat's engine hummed to life, a steady pulse cutting through the marina's lingering fog. Sentinel stood at the bow, wind ruffling his fur, his stance tall and unafraid, ears forward, as the boat eased into open water, the dock receding like a faded memory. Eric joined him, one hand on the wheel, the other reaching down instinctively. Sentinel leaned in his head, pressing against Eric's palm, a single profound act that shattered the last barriers, warm and solid breath sinking with the waves' rise and fall. Tears blurred Eric's vision, not of sorrow, but released the horizon, a canvas of quiet rebirth where past shadows dissolved in the sun's ascent. He whispered Sentinel's name, the dog responding with a soft whine, their gaze locked into the endless blue, a symbol of trust, unbreakable motion, carrying them forward into light.